A lot of people seem to have problems writing conclusions. One of the most common complaints about writing a conclusion that comes to me from history students is the sense that when you're writing a conclusion, it just feels repetitive. Can I just allay those fears for you straight away? Perhaps because of the very nature of conclusion writing, there will be a sense of conclusions always being a little bit repetitive. In school history, you're writing such short amounts of writing compared to what might happen in academia. So your introduction and your conclusion are quite close to each other. If your introduction is saying what you're about to do, and your conclusion has said what you have done, and those two elements are close to each other, there will be a sense that you're being repetitive. However, if you're writing a huge textbook, if you're writing an 80,000 word thesis or dissertation on a topic, there won't be that same sense of it being too repetitive because there's a larger body in between your introduction and your conclusion. So I guess what I want you to have a look in this screen that I've got for you here is the idea that the introduction and the conclusion are mirror images of each other. They're flipped versions of each other. They are doing similar things in similar ways, close to each other, and therefore it confuses a lot of people who feel that it shouldn't be that way. I guess that's why I picked up on the idea of Alice in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass. Clearly, Alice is the same person, but through the mirroring process, a weird feeling develops. An introduction and conclusion are looking at each other through the lens of the body. They're close to each other. It will feel repetitive because they're still very much part of the same essay, doing much the same job. It doesn't mean you're wrong if your conclusions are repetitive. Sometimes it might actually mean you're doing the right thing and you just feel you're wrong. So, just bear in mind again that at its heart, an introduction says, this is what I am about to do. And a conclusion is essentially saying, this is what I have just done. And if you do both of those correctly, they probably match. Therefore, they will be similar. So let's have a look. An introduction must have a hypothesis or a thesis statement in it. A conclusion must also have those elements in it. If your introduction starts with the hypothesis, and I quite like a nice strong introduction with a really clear hypothesis right at the outset, if it starts that way, then perhaps your conclusion needs to arrive back at that hypothesis. So you've almost got that first sentence, last sentence effect taking place. Your introduction is going to foreshadow the key arguments that are going to come up in the body. This is my hypothesis. Here is how I'm going to support it. Here are the arguments that I'm going to lay to support my hypothesis. Well, your conclusion should also be revisiting those arguments. In a short essay, you'll feel like you've just said those arguments. But we're teaching you a structure that applies over a much larger word limit. And so it may have been quite a long time since those arguments were first established. So an introduction is saying, here's my hypothesis, and here are my pathways, my arguments, my lines of logic that I'm going to use to support it. And in your conclusion, you're saying, here is my hypothesis, and I've arrived at it by using these different pathways. Now, an introduction will set forth the background information, the contextual information, the definitions that allow that process to work. Your conclusion doesn't really need to re-establish the background. You've done it. It doesn't need to re-establish the context or perhaps define terms. You've done it. So what does it do instead? Well, it can do a number of things, and this might be why a lot of people find a conclusion is shorter than an introduction. You've already covered some of these things, but your conclusion will summarize the main ideas. And I know that sounds vague, but everyone's essay is going to be so different. It's going to summarize the main ideas. You're going to revisit in those arguments some of the key quotes, key sources, key ideas that came through, key personalities who made the ideas, the evidence work in each of your arguments. You might be talking about historians or famous people, problems in evidence that arose during your arguments. Revisit the big concepts. But you're not really introducing anything new. So up until this point, it's a little bit like debating, where a first speaker introduces the other speakers and the main themes and ideas. The body paragraphs build arguments, the second speaker builds arguments, and the third speaker shouldn't be introducing new evidence and so on, particularly if they're, in a complex task. You're not bringing in anything new, you're tying it all together, you're revisiting the ideas of first and second speaker. Something that happens in some conclusions that's a bit different is you may have uncovered historical issues that need further investigation. If you want to flag that for your reader, this is the part where you do it. In the area of the study of the frontier wars, again, those who've done Year 11 modern history would know what we're talking about here. There's a discussion around some of our famous Australians who knew about the massacres of Indigenous people who have never been held historically to account. People like Samuel Griffith. And you might introduce in a conclusion there, well, future research should focus on Samuel Griffith's understanding of what was happening in the frontier wars, because that hasn't been done properly. So you might steer in that direction. But broadly speaking, in most of the essays you're doing, you're not going to get an opportunity to do that, or you may not have much to say about it. So I guess when we're looking at a conclusion, I'm really trying to say to you it's very much the same as an introduction, but different. It's a flip side version. You can see one is broadening out, the other is narrowing back into the thesis statement. It's through the looking glass. It's mirror language. I use this phrase from Cambodia. Same, but different. It's exactly the same thing, but nothing like it. It's not quite as bad as that, but same, but different. In your conclusion, in a sense, you're looking at what you said in your introduction and rewording it, reordering it, rephrasing it, so it reflects the introduction of the use of new information within the body of your assignment.